This episode of Fern and Friends is brought to you by our sponsors at Island.io, Mechanized AI, and Torres Event Management. Good day, my friends, and welcome back to another edition of the Fern and Friends podcast, which is part of the Fern Effect. My co-host Sophie is here with me today.
Hi, Fern. It's nice to be back in the saddle with you for the next Fern and Friends episode. I've been gone far too long.
Yes, Sophie, we missed your quick wit and smiling face. Today, we have a senior leader from Island.io, the enterprise browser company.
So let's look into Mr. Leland and his vast background. Michael Leland has spent over 3 decades at the intersection of networking, operations, and cybersecurity, and his resume reads like a tour of the industry's most pivotal moments. He co-founded Nitro Security, built their SIEM vision from the ground up, and watched it get acquired by McAfee, where he went on to serve as Chief Technical Strategist. From there, he became Chief Cybersecurity Evangelist at SentinelOne, shaping the XDR roadmap and identity security portfolio. Today, he's Field CTO at Island, and if you haven't been paying attention to what the enterprise browser is doing to legacy security infrastructure, this conversation is about to change that.
That's right, Sophie. Island.io is not only changing the game with enterprise browser tools, but they are bringing a suite of products and services that will turn any AI into enterprise AI. Now that's our jam. So let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the show, a 30-year veteran in technology. He is the field CTO from Island.io, Michael Leland.
Thank you, Fern. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you know what? We're jumping in. You know this is quick and punchy, quick and punchy, quick and punchy. So Island is all about the enterprise browser. And for the, most of my audience to date, because I've been talking about AI every day in every way, but we haven't really elevated the conversation to the enterprise browser level discussion. Enter in this great partnership. And I just want to pause and say, thank you to my sponsors at Island.io. We appreciate you leaning into this podcast mashup, AI mashup, to not only support what we're doing here, but also talk about what's happening in your world. So, for our non-techie listeners, tell us what this whole enterprise browser capability is, because it's really more for corporations than it is for someone who's sitting at home. It's not a home tool. So talk to me about, at the base, what this is all about.
Sure. So Fern, about 6 years ago, we looked at the market and thought, everywhere else in the enterprise, we buy enterprise-grade technology, right? When you're opening a new branch office, you don't go to Best Buy and buy a Linksys switch. That's a consumer-grade product. Right. You go and buy enterprise-grade networking technologies. And yet, for years, we've been using a consumer browser. And the more knowledge workers are using a browser to access their business applications and sensitive data, the attack surface of that consumer browser has caused a tremendous risk to the organization, both from compromises in Chromium to data loss that could occur through standard web application usage. But it's interesting you say that we're the browser company. That is where we started. But what's interesting to note is that about 2 years ago, customers kept telling us, we love what you're doing for us inside the browser. We love that you're adding more data protection mechanisms. You're adding this concept of an application data boundary that protects data movement. We love the fact that you're able to steer traffic from web apps to my infrastructure behind our firewall. But we still have a long tail of thick apps. So while we introduced our first browser technology 6 years ago, and because of that, we've spent years hardening the Chromium code base. We took 40% of the Chromium code out because it was consumer grade, and we replaced it with secure by design architectures that is a true enterprise grade application. But 2 years ago, when customers told us, we love what you're doing inside the browser, what about our long tail of thick apps? Mm-hmm. We identified then the fact that we needed to expand our coverage and not just satisfy the use cases for browser applications, but those long tail of thick apps 2 years ago were things like Excel and PowerPoint and your various PWAs. But most of those applications have gone the way of the browser, right? They've gone to the SaaSification of the network. But in the last 6 months, we've seen something very unique. The exact opposite is happening with AI. AI, whose natural habitat used to be the browser, is now the desktop, with things like Claude Code and Gemini CLI and Cursor. So now more than ever, our ability to expand the coverage for both data protection, last mile controls, visibility and governance, not just to delivery of web applications, but also outside the browser to thick apps as well. And that includes routing and steering traffic intelligently using zero trust principles.
So what are you telling CIOs about helping close in the gap here?
So I think the biggest gap that's been exposed with AI is the fact that the only way and the only place to properly measure user intent is as close to the user as possible. And that's because of a couple of things. One, we talked about AI running native and local to the user. In that case, there's no way you can evaluate a user's intent if you're expected to send all your traffic up to a distant POP where you're going to break and inspect it, a la traditional SASE technologies. The other is the fact that as we're interacting with AI, whether it's an agent interacting with our browser, a coding tool like Claude Code interacting with our file system, all of those cases are happening right at the desktop, right at the end user interface. And so our approach is the closer you get to the end user, the better you can both evaluate and enforce the appropriate policy to both put guardrails on data usage and AI usage, but also to identify, inspect, and steer traffic accordingly so it doesn't go through that break and inspect environment that most VPNs and SASE vendors have deployed.
So this is like a wonderful softball to what was just announced, I don't know, maybe in the last 24 hours, we'll just say this week, and you're moving from this traditional SASE technology to this modern SASE. You just dropped the whole Island Enterprise Network solution. Talk to me about that. And I had the pleasure of listening to you earlier today, and you gave all these SASE market by the numbers. 62% critical to the overall security strategy, 79% plan to implement SSE in the next 24 months. So we know the demand is there. Talk to me about this new solution that Island's bringing to life for the not the consumer base, but for the enterprise base.
So it's important to know that we're not just introducing the Island network today. While we've improved the capabilities and functionality in the last week's release, we've been doing what's called SSE for a while. SSE is the Secure Service Edge part of SASE. SASE is the broader environment. About 3 years ago, we introduced something called Island Private Access. That is Island's ZTNA capability. Zero Trust network architecture is built on the premise of what's called identity-driven least privilege access. That means you only authorize a user for the exact behavior and requirements he needs in a given application. But for us, identity alone wasn't enough to steer a policy. So we added 3 more capabilities. Not only does your identity matter, right? Who you are, what group you belong to in your IDP, what OU group assignments you have in your Active Directory, but so does device posture, right? Is your device compliant with my organizational demands? Is your disk fully encrypted? Is your EPP and EDR tool fully installed and up to date? So not only is identity, but also device posture. But we added 2 more. Network location. Where are you physically connecting to the network? Because you should have a very different policy when you're connecting to the corporate network as when you take that same laptop and connect to, let's say, a Wi-Fi hotspot in a Starbucks, right? 2 very distinct policies can follow you. And the last one is geolocation. So we've had ZTNA for the last 3 or 4 years. And we originally built it to steer network traffic that was born from the browser, so web apps, SaaS application, things like that. But with the introduction of what's called Island Desktop, which is a background service that lives outside the browser, we can now steer ZTNA traffic or application traffic across the Island network for thick apps as well. So maybe you've got a developer and he prefers running a locally installed copy of Visual Studio, but he needs to connect to a GitHub repository that sits back behind your corporate firewall. In the past, he'd have to fire up a VPN or load a ZTNA agent, which has its own challenges with deployment, cost, complexity, end user experience. And now that can all be facilitated by the installation of a single browser application with the background service. We've also had something called Secure Web Gateway for a while, which allows us to restrict access to destination locations based on their category or risk. The third is remote browser isolation. That's the third component of SSE, is what's called RBI. Essentially, if you're trying to navigate to a web page that's either uncategorized or potentially risky, you may not want that to load locally on the end user's device, so you can instantiate that browser session in a remote sandbox.
Okay.
Right? And the fourth one is CASB, which essentially is a SaaS API product. It allows us to identify when users may have shared files with overly permissive privileges to a remote site or location, and then allow that user to revoke those permissions natively. We've had those four capabilities for the better part of 2 years. What's changed dramatically in our announcement of Island Network is we're introducing, first of all, the new Island Cloud, and where most cloud environments from SASE vendors have been built up in single cloud service providers in their own megapops, we chose to co-locate and partner with all three of the largest cloud service providers. So we are now co-located in every micropop for every hyperscaler out there: Azure, AWS, and GCP, which means we are not only the shortest path, which improves the end user experience and performance, but we also have a fully resilient path across all three hypervisors or hyperscalers. So that's unique. What we're adding as well, though, is not every device will have a browser installed, and not every device has a user sitting in front of it. Think IoT devices, or in manufacturing, it could be PLCs. They still need secure network connectivity, but they're never going to have an agent installed or a browser installed.
Too old.
So we introduced things like local proxy, IPsec tunnel support, and pack file support. So it rounds out the entire spectrum of what SASE outcomes are. But I want to point out, we're not trying to completely displace customers' SASE. We're trying to provide an alternative solution built on a modern architecture that delivers the same outcomes in a more performant manner, with a better ROI and a better end user experience.
All right, Michael, I would love to talk to you for another 20 minutes, but this is short and punchy, and I feel like if I hit the play button, brother will be going on and on and on. You are a true savant of all things enterprise browser, but I think the key, what you just said to me, is your initial thinking Island was about rethinking enterprise and securing the browser layer, but you've expanded to so much more. And so we invite everyone to look out for what's more coming from Island.io, what's coming from this modern SASE platform, and check them out. Island.io, check me out at the Fern Effect. Fern and Friends, thank you so much for your time. We're going to put a pin in it right there. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Fern. Thank you very much.
Fern, that conversation was brilliant. Michael is a powerhouse in this space of enterprise browser and enterprise AI. Here is what I took away from the discussion. AI security is no longer just about the browser. It's about protecting the entire AI experience. The closer security gets to the user, the smarter and more effective it becomes. The companies winning with AI are the ones rebuilding for a modern AI-ready world.
Sophie, another great recap. Thank you. Friends, Island.io is beyond the rise. And hopefully, you gained more insight into their new modern SASE offering. More to come. Special thanks to our sponsors, Island.io, Mechanized AI, and Torres Event Management, for helping bring this Fern and Friends episode to life. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the weekend and join us next week at Fern and Friends.